Hello, fellow music nerds. Welcome back to Music Makers and Soul Shakers. I'm your host, Steve Dawson, coming to you from the Hen House Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a guitarist, songwriter, and producer, originally from Vancouver, Canada. I love all aspects of making records, so I thought I'd make a podcast and bring in a slew of folks who've also made records in one way or another and yak about it with them. Each month I'll be bringing you an in-depth conversation with a new guest. It may be a musician, a songwriter, a producer, or an engineer, but each of these people will have a fascinating story to tell about their lives and their involvement in the process of being a music maker and or a soul shaker. Thanks for joining me, and feel free to reach out to me through the podcast website at www.stevedawson.ca. And now, here's another episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers. Folks, how you doing? Thanks so much for joining me. Music nerds of the world, we have a great episode here for you this month with my guest, Gabriel Roth, also known to some as Bosco Mann. He is the founder of Daptone record label and the kingpin of the Dap-Kings band. He's a bass player, producer, engineer. He was also the founder of a label before Daptone called Desco. And he's a great songwriter, great musician, and just generally a pretty inspiring human being. It was great to speak with him. Originally, I got to know him through his work with Sharon Jones. As her star rose over the years, I always listened to her records and loved them. And Gabriel's the man behind those sounds. Along the way, he was also involved in so many more projects and things that I found out about kind of bit by bit, really, by keeping up to date with what Daptone was up to. I sort of rode the Gabriel Roth wave, so to speak. So heavy soul and funk artists like Lee Fields and Charles Bradley came through the studio. He's also worked with Booker T. Jones on an album in the last, I don't know when that was, 8 or 9 years ago, something like that. He was involved in the Amy Winehouse whirlwind, of course, and lately he's been making records with the mighty James Hunter. Most of this stuff has been coming out of an awesome factory of music that I find very inspiring, and that was his studio in Brooklyn that he built from scratch, and you're going to hear all about that, including Charles Bradley putting up some drywall for him and Sharon Jones doing that and some electrical work for him along the way. He built the studio. He built this little empire basically out of a bunch of very talented friends. So the names of the people involved in the Daptone releases, like Neil Sugarman and Binky Griptite, Homer Steinwise, these are guys that he's worked with for a long time, and it's a really cool little scene. Like, it sort of brings to mind Stax Records and Motown Records back in the day. Very DIY. They were working on shoestring budgets, making super cool dirty funk records right from the beginning, and he really hasn't strayed from that. He's really stuck to his guns over the years. And one other thing I want to point out before we get going, that everybody needs to go and look up on the internet, look up Shitty is Pretty. What it is an essay that he wrote quite a while ago, maybe 15 years ago or something, or maybe more, maybe 20 years ago. And it showed up in a I think a British recording magazine, could have been an American one, I'm not sure. But he wrote this article. It's in 2 parts. So it's Shitty is Pretty Volume 1 and Shitty is Pretty Volume 2. And the gist of it is kind of like how to make a dirty funk 45 record. But when I read it, I just found it so inspiring because so much of it kind of bleeds over into other kinds of music as well. You don't have to be making funk records. I was never a funk producer or record maker, although I love listening to funk music. It wasn't really what I was up to, but I just found so much of what he had to say about making records in general, and his approach to music and his approach to not overplaying and not overdoing things and keeping things simple and not feeling like you have to make records the way that everybody else does. Basically, that's the thing that I took out of it the most, was like, here's this guy saying, just do your own thing, make music the way that you want to make it, and forget what everybody else says. Just do what you got to do what you're good at, and do what you love. So you really should read that. It's not that long, but it's an incredible piece of writing, I think. And we got to talk about that too. So we got into all kinds of stuff, all kinds of great music. You'll hear about his history and how he got started and what he's been up to lately as well. So please enjoy my conversation with Gabriel Roth. The thing that really kind of strikes me a lot about you and your career is that what I find is most people have this arc of learning and getting good at what they do, and generally have an early career, an early catalog of stuff that they try and bury or forget. Whereas you just kind of seem to come from nowhere making badass funk records from the get-go. And I'm just wondering, like, how the hell did that happen? Like, what was, I mean, you know, like we could maybe talk about your early, like your growing up and stuff like that, but how, like as a producer and like a studio guy, like how did you not have like this kind of forgettable early portion of your career, or have you just buried it really well?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I guess, you know, my perspective is not the same. My perspective is, you know, not that I'm constantly improving, getting better, but just that I listen to old records a lot of times with a lot of regret and a lot of thinking, man, I didn't know what I was doing.
Sure.
But I mean, I think probably since I started making records, I think it's because I came into making records from a funny place, a unique place. I didn't come into making records as somebody who wanted to be an artist or even a musician or even a producer or any of that stuff. I thought I was going to be a math teacher. You know, it took me
Really?
many years. Yeah, and I still kind of like to do it. You know, and it took me many years to really take seriously the idea of working in music as an honest career. I kept thinking, like, at some point I'm going to have to get a real job. You know,
right? And like the bottom's going to fall out of this shit. Yeah.
You know, and now I'm getting pretty old and I still don't have a real job. So, you know, at some point I kind of had to take it seriously, I guess. But I think from the beginning, I started by making records with a guy named Philip Lehman. Yeah. My first record was Desco, and he was a guy that was putting out these reissues. He was just kind of a crazy dude, and I was real into the records he was putting out. And a mutual friend hooked us up and told him that I knew how to make records, and told me that he knew how to put out records. And
did you know how to make records?
Not really. I mean, I started taking recording classes at NYU.
Oh, okay.
I didn't have a major, and I was into my like junior year.
Yeah.
So I just kind of flipped through the book and looked for something that seemed fun and not too hard. And it was cool, you know. It was like acoustics classes and electronics classes and music history and music theory. Yeah. All stuff that seemed like interesting classes.
Right.
So I just kind of, you know, I mean, I was into music, but I just kind of randomly grabbed that, and so I knew a little bit about how to record, but, you know, like a recording student, I didn't really know much. I knew some general principles and, you know, how to play on a tape machine and what notes were in a C chord. And so, like, I wasn't real deep before that. But we started making records, and the first records we made were kind of like fake old records.
Like you were really going for that retro kind of sound or something, you mean?
No, it wasn't. I mean, it was more literal than that. I mean, it was the first record I put out was literally a reissue of a soundtrack from 1971 of a kung fu movie soundtrack.
Really? Which one was that?
It was called The Revenge of Mr. Mapoji. And, you know, we got away with it. I mean, we sold it to record stores as reissues. And everybody thought it was this old movie, and we'd go into record stores to sell it because at the time that's how we were, you know, selling records. We'd go around in Phillips Jeep and just drive around to record stores in New York and Philly and Boston and stuff. And
so do you mean that movie didn't really exist? You just made it up?
Yeah, the movie never existed.
I love it.
But people, right away, people bought into it, and people were telling us, like, oh yeah, my cousin's got the VHS. I'll see if I can borrow it. That's a great movie, you know. And you find that, you know, we didn't really have to bullshit people that much. They would kind of, you know, bullshit themselves, you know. So, but, you know, it was a time, they were talking about 96, you know, 95, 96. So at that time, it was like there was a scene of people that were into like funk records. It was kind of the beginning of the whole kind of deep funk thing with Kev Darge and Snowboy and these guys in England. And there were collectors, you know, in Europe and a few here, you know, that were buying these kind of real rare raw funk records. And I was just buying the reissues and the compilations and stuff. But those people had zero interest in a new record.
Right.
You know, people that had that taste in music had zero interest in a new record. Because,
right, like after like 1976, they're just tuning
out.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, exactly. If 76. Yeah, I mean, because when you talked about like the state of that kind of music at that point, it was kind of this, you know, that acid jazz kind of scene.
Right.
And like, you know, the Brand New Heavies was kind of the coolest band that you could find, really. So, and if that was pretty far away from the rawness of what everybody was, not everybody, but what this small scene was digging about these old funk records. So our take on it was like, we would not want to hear somebody's new record because they all sound terrible.
Yeah.
The way that people make records sounds terrible. So for me, I was mostly along for the ride because Philip was pretty crazy and it was a lot of his ideas. But I guess the point is I came into it with this very contrary attitude towards the music business. One, that I didn't want to be in the music industry. Uh-huh. Two, I didn't care how it worked.
Yeah.
Or who bought my records because I wasn't trying to make a living off it.
Right.
I didn't care if anybody knew who I was. I didn't care if the record sounded distorted or like the things that I was tapped into was the things that I loved about listening to records,
Right.
And I had zero agenda about, we're going to fool people or we're going to come off, we need to sound more retro or we need to sound more like this or how did they do it at Stax? Like there was none of that type of thinking. It was all about kind of what feels good and how can we make the most raw, fucked up punk record,
Right.
That was our kind of our mantra, and that was kind of the only place we were coming from. Because of that, I think from the beginning we had a very different approach, different pressures, or maybe lack of pressure, that most people have when they're making records, especially early in their career. People are trying to be successful and trying to follow what's going on in the industry and stuff. And I was very contrary from the beginning because I was like, I don't want any part of the music industry. I'm just making these cool, messed up records. And
that's actually a pretty cool way to come at it, not having that pressure.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess just to your point, that's kind of probably why I had a certain sound from the beginning, is because it was coming out of, though my tastes have changed and my approaches have changed. There's definitely stuff I used to do that, in the studio, even that now I roll my eyes and think, man, why would I do it that way? But in general, I kind of have the same attitude now as when I started, So in the same kind of philosophy. And over the years, the really valuable part of it is kind of building a family of people that have a similar philosophy towards music, and it's not necessarily all about being contrary, but it's about really stripping away the bullshit and focusing on the thing that we love about it, the thing that makes you get excited when you hear a record, just focusing on that feeling and kind of drowning out the rest of the noise,
Yeah, man. And so actually you bring up something that I wanted to talk to you about, which is that whole family thing. And, and that's something that you've succeeded at more than anyone in modern times that I can think of, is like surrounding yourself with people that you've worked with for, I don't know, like at least 20 years now, I would imagine. It's the same guys over and over again. And you guys have this thing, and it's kind of the way that Motown rolled and Stax rolled and those kind of labels and scenes. Was that ever something that you were setting out to do, or are these just guys that you lucked out, like from day one, basically you've had this crew of people around you?
I mean, it definitely wasn't like a crew of people just showed up at day one, but it was, I think it's the same thing. I think the kind of process created the reality, really, because the process was just trying to do stuff that felt good and having a certain philosophy. And when you're hanging out, you meet people and they meet people, and you need a trumpet player, and somebody says, I can call my friend. And, that's how it happens. And,
right.
And people come to the studio, and what happens is if somebody really gels with you, if they really dig what you're doing, you dig what they're doing, you end up doing more stuff together. And if they don't, then they kind of, fade away. Maybe you have a session, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, whatever, but you're not calling the dude for the next session,
Yeah.
So,
but it is remarkable to me that, from early recordings that you're involved in, it's like the same guys. There's like, Binky Griptite's been there.
Yeah, Binky and Homer and Neil and all that. Yeah, it's been a steady group.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and it's something I'm maybe the most proud of, is just being able to surround myself with friends for this many years.
Yeah, it's
as a band or label or anything, you're right. I mean, it's pretty rare for people to be able to tolerate each other for this long. So obviously there's been a few exceptions, but for the most part, man, like we have a pretty strong crew. We have an amazing family of people.
That way. Yeah. So when you were starting out, like doing those early Desco records, where was the studio? Like, did you like pre-Daptone? Where were you recording?
The very first one we did at a basement studio on Ludlow Street on the Lower East Side. Okay. Before that was a nice place to be, actually. like my friend Ray Lugo had a place, and we did the Revenge of Mr. Poji there. And after that, we started going out to Long Island, because Philip found some studio out there called Dare Studios in Deer Park, Long Island. And it was like a heavy metal rehearsal spot.
Really?
But it was real cheap, and they had like a tape machine out there. So we'd go out there, and that's when we recorded, Sharon's first records her first records with us, and the first time we recorded Lee Fields, and that's where we recorded like the Doctaris and a bunch of those first records we recorded there. And then we did one record, Avatar, because Philip had a buddy that worked at he was the power station at the time, called
like
The Other Side.
A big fancy place.
That was like it was the one record we did at a fancy place, and it was the hardest one to get to sound good.
Really?
But and then, yeah. And then we started. We kind of had our own studios. We rented a place with Frankie Inglese, who used to be. I don't know if you remember Frankie Jackson, Soul Kitchen. This party was in New York for years, but we rented a spot with him on the Lower East Side, on Orchard Street, in Grand, I think it was. There's a beautiful old Jewish couple had this spot, and the old man would play violin downstairs, and they told us we could use the apartment for whatever we wanted. And we put in real thick carpeting and started recording.
Little did they know.
And about a week after we started recording, they came up and told us, "I'm sorry, you can't do that here." But that was one of our first studios that was really ours. And that one, we recorded, some more of Sharon's first stuff, like "Damn It's Hot," and a lot of that "Give Me the Paw" record, and some stuff with Lee, some of the other stuff with Lee Fields and stuff. And then we rented a place on 41st Street, 440 West 41st Street, in the basement of this apartment building. We kind of had an office and a basement and a studio and a sub-basement. This is when Desco was in its heyday. And we were there for a number of years. That was where we made most of the Desco stuff.
Okay.
Was there. So we were there until around 2000, when my partner and I shut down the label and parted ways.
So just to clarify the timeline, was Sharon Jones involved in the Desco days, or was that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
She was involved. Yeah, she made records in Deer Park. I met her in Deer Park at Dare Studios, man. It was, we had the saxophone player we used to work with a lot called Joe Urbeck. And I said, we were recording with Lee Fields, the song Steam Train and Let a Man Do What He Wanted to. That was the first 45 we did.
Right.
We were recording with him, and we needed some background singers for a couple songs. And Joe said, "Oh, my girlfriend can come and bring a couple friends." And we said, "Fine." And he showed up the next day with Sharon. And we said, "Where are your friends?" She said, "Where are your friends? There's supposed to be 3 of you." And she said, "Well, I pay 3 when you can pay me." And that was probably the first thing Sharon ever said to me.
Really?
And we hit it off, yeah. And it was funny because that day she recorded background vocals. And there was one song that we had. It wasn't even a song. It was for an album. Philip had a buddy that was, fancied himself a comedian and had this whole routine of, and we kind of recorded this funk track, and it was almost like a blowfly type of thing. It wasn't that dirty, but he had this intention of putting this kind of rap over the top of it, where he was going to talk about getting out of jail and this whole thing he had. Anyway, it was called Switchblade, and we just wanted Sharon to sing the background, just Switchblade, sing the harmonies.
Yeah.
So we brought her in there, and there was no vocal on the track. There was just the track, and she was feeling it. And she sang the harmonies, and they were kind of crushing. And then she's asking, like, what is this? Like, why am I just singing Switchblade? So we kind of described to her, like, yeah, it's this thing, and he's going to do this kind of funny bit about getting out of jail and something, and his name's Switchblade, and blah, blah, blah. And she just started vamping. And we hit record. I think I sped the tape machine up so that when you played it back at regular speed, her voice would be lower.
Yeah.
Because, she was kind of pretending to be a man getting out of jail. And she just, off the top of her head, just completely,
no shit.
Just crushed like 3-4 minutes of her, and we were just rolling in the studio. So, Phil's buddy never made it on the record, and that was the first lead vocal I ever recorded of Sharon, when she wasn't even singing; she was just talking trash, with the tape slowed down.
Wow.
So, but that was when I started recording her, and then on that Orchard Street studio we recorded, "Damn It's Hot" and "Bump and Touch" and a bunch of those early Desco singles. And then by the time we got to 440, we were recording like "You Better Think Twice" and some of that stuff. But she never, we'd intended on working on an album for Desco, and we kind of shut our doors before we got her album, before we ever got an album with her.
Okay.
That's why that was the first thing on Daptone.
So can you tell me a bit about like in that era, like the Desco era, when you're kind of, it seems like you're moving studios quite a bit and you didn't really have a home base really that you were digging into. How were you like, were you generally setting up all in one room, minimal miking, all that kind of stuff? Or did you have like, were you isolating stuff because you had short space or?
I mean, we had a little bit of isolation. Like Dare Studios, I think, had like 2 little rooms. One of them the size of a kind of big closet. One of them the size of a slightly bigger closet.
Yeah.
And I remember I was engineering and playing bass for a lot of it, so I would just plug into a direct box in the control room.
Okay.
And, had to punch in. I'd always hit record with my toe. But, and it was mostly me and Philip and a very good friend, Mike Wagner, who for years made records with us. And the 3 of us would do it. And we had different friends that would come in, but the 3 of us were kind of keeping most of it together ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we were mostly in one room when we could be,
Yeah.
We did overdubs though. I mean, we did, horn overdubs and vocal overdubs and percussion and whatever we needed to do, we could overdub.
Okay.
But we tried to cut in the same room when we could.
Yeah. When you eventually decided to get the Daptone thing going and like, did the studio fall into place very soon after that? Like, how did the timeline of that work?
Well, I guess after Desco, I was of course, heartbroken and broke and temping, taking stupid jobs.
Really?
But, I was trying to get something going again, and I talked to, there's a company called See Through that existed for a moment, like everything else in the music industry, and they offered me like an imprint deal.
Okay.
Where I could just basically produce records and they were going to put them out. And I was like, oh, that's a great deal. I worked, negotiated with him and haggled and finally got the deal we wanted. And they said, okay, great. The check's in the mail. We're going to write you this big check. So I wanted to start recording. So my friend Amayo, by that time we'd kind of started like Antibalas. Yeah. My friend Martin Berna started Antibalas. And, at the beginning we've kind of stumbled upon Amayo because he had this. I don't know how deep I'm going to go into these stories. I'll go on and on and on. But
go, man.
We were walking through Williamsburg and we see this weird Nigerian like tea shop place that we go in, and it's Amayo's place. He's rented this big place on Grand Street, and upstairs he would do fashion shows and parties, and he was a designer and he used to he did everything, But we started talking to him because, he was Nigerian, and at the time there weren't very few people who knew like who Fela was, and we were obsessed, and we were trying to play all this Afrobeat music and stuff. So we kind of connected with him, and he had this big basement. So he agreed somehow to let me build a studio in his basement. I don't remember how the whole situation worked. So I built a studio in his basement, and it was a basement. It was, 5-6 foot ceiling.
Oh, wow.
So I built a studio in his basement thinking, the whole time thinking that I'd finish this negotiation, this check is coming, and I got this sweet deal coming my way. And so I hired musicians, a lot of them, mostly people I worked with at Desco and stuff, but I gave everybody some money and I bought some gear and I started recording. I had like a 8-track Atari machine, half-inch. We started recording. We did Antibalas records down there. We did the first Sharon Jones record we recorded there in that basement.
Okay.
And then it wasn't, and then we also did Neil, I'd done Neil Sugarman's, the Sugarman 3 records. I'd done his first 2 records I had produced on my label Desco, and he was just an artist. But so he wanted me to produce another record for him, and he was going to do a deal, I think, with Velour at the time. I don't know if they're still around, but he was going to do a deal with Velour, and so I was producing this record for him, and we finished his record, and we finished the Sharon record. And his deal kind of didn't look great, and my deal went completely south, and they never came through with the money.
It just never happened.
Well, what? It was kind of scummy because they came back to me. I finished the whole record, and I submitted it to them. This is Dap-Dip and the first Sharon record, and I submitted it to them, and they were like, we don't really like it. It's not going to work out. I was just like, wait, what? Like, and because, things, if they didn't like it, I totally, I got to respect that. I don't want to take the money if they don't like the record, but I knew that the whole reason why they signed me was they were so hyped up on everything I did on Desco.
Right.
And if you like Desco, I don't see how you could not like Daptone. I mean, that was the logical next record.
Yeah.
It was the same band playing the same kind of music. It was put together a little bit better, but it was real raw. I mean, it was the same. If there was something that scared you about that, you would have.
It feels like a live record.
Yeah, it's a raw record, and so I thought, man, well, they don't like it, I guess, so I kind of sunk away with my tail between my legs, thinking like, how am I ever going to pay back all this stuff? Because, thinking that check was coming, it took me a while to learn that lesson. The check's not coming, but
right.
My credit cards were maxed out, and I borrowed money from everybody I knew, and I was, it was bad. So I slunk away, and I was thinking, this is terrible. And of course, within a week after them telling me they didn't like the record, their backing fell through and their company disappeared. So it became kind of obvious to me quickly that it was like, man, it's not that they didn't like the record; they just didn't have the money,
right?
And they'd already kind of signed this contract, so they didn't want to. They just wanted to back out.
Yeah.
So they did it in a real crappy way. So I was always mad about that. But anyway, so that's kind of how we got started. Sugarman came to me and he was like, man, your deal's gone. My deal's gone. We have these 2 records. You did it before, because he really missed Desco. He missed having a family of musicians and this kind of, a label that had a sound and a vibe and that meant something, that wasn't just a company. It was actually something. So he came to me about starting a company together, and I was like, man, I hate this business, man. I don't want to sell records. If I'll make them if you sell them, kind of. We made that kind of loosely made that deal.
Yeah.
And started making records. We started with the records that we had.
So at that point, you had the Sugarman 3 and the first Sharon record.
Yeah, Pure Cane Sugar and Daptone were the first 2 records we had, and we're able to get like a couple distribution things going on, and again, these stories keep going. But we got a distribution deal with Caroline, who had done a lot of distribution for Desco before that, and we knew some people over there, and they were very friendly and stuff. But at the time, they weren't signing anybody new, so they had us go through a middleman company, and we went through a middleman company. They were called. Geez, what were they called? See, it doesn't matter. These companies come and go.
They're gone. Yeah, totally.
They're gone. Yeah, but which is the point of the story. So we put those records out, and those were the first real Desco releases. They came out on, they sold CDs, which is a big thing at the time, compact discs, if you remember those. They sold,
I don't.
A bunch of, good, Dap-Dip and Pure Cane Sugar. They sold a bunch of them, and they told us, great, we got, $30,000 for you. Shelter, that was the name of his company, was called Shelter. A guy named Duncan Hutchinson. If you ever see him, well, I hope you never see him. But so anyway, Duncan Hutchinson ran it, and they'd signed a bunch of other people too, and as their middleman deal, and they talked everybody else into doing all this promotion, spending money on all kinds of co-op ads and all kinds of stuff. So they tried to talk us into it. We were like, man, we're not spending money on that stupid stuff. We want to sell. We weren't, like I said, we were pretty realistic. We were like, we want to sell a couple thousand records and make a couple $1,000. We'll be happy.
Right.
So at the end of it, what happened was they'd convinced all these other people to spend money, and so all their other records were in the red. So when it came time to get paid, they were totally unrecouped and went under. Right. Meanwhile, our records are totally in the black, but it didn't matter,
There was no money.
There was no money, again. But before we found that out, unfortunately, when they told us, oh, you got like $30,000 coming, which we thought was, it sounded like $1 million really. For, it was way more than any money we'd ever seen. We rented this house out in Bushwick, and proceeded again to max out whatever credit cards I could find, and wait for grandparents to die so you could get another $500. It was rough. We're scrapping from wherever you could and borrowing, and we maxed our credit cards, and we got some black market Home Depot cards. That's another story. But we started knocking walls down. We rented this place, signed like a long lease. And
this is in Brooklyn now?
This is in Bushwick. This is our studio. Yeah, okay. Bushwick. And on Troutman Street. And we started maxing out credit cards, buying all kinds of equipment, and well,
will they never learn?
Equipment. Will they never learn? And then, of course, they went out of business, and they told us, "Oh, the check's not coming." And I had this at the time. I had this whole budget. I was like, "Okay, well, I'm going to spend, $5,000 on plumbers and $5,000 on electricians, and we're going to get contractors, and we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to build the studio." So basically, we're left right after signing the lease and knocking down all the walls and buying a bunch of, thousands of dollars worth of drywall and soundproofing and all this stuff. and then it was just like nothing. So that was rough. That was kind of the roughest
Shit.
as far as that arc went, and because it's just like, when will you learn, and and
for a guy that never intended to be in the business, you sure like dragged yourself through the mud.
I sure did. Yeah. So we ended up doing it ourselves, and Sharon was helping me. I showed her how to do wiring, which I didn't know. I don't know why I thought I knew how to do it, I mean, this is before the internet, so I must have looked in a book, if you remember those. They were back in the time of CDs. But, so her and I did the wiring, and
really?
Charles Bradley taught me how to do a lot of plumbing stuff. He taught me how to balance radiators to get the bubbles out of. And we did, and he told me, what he did, man? He told me he was going to cook. He liked to cook. He told me, man, I ripped out the gas line because there was, again, there's a lot of stories here. I get distracted, but there was gas lines in the house running to all of the, like I knocked out the ceiling. Man, so many things went wrong in that house. I don't even know where to start. I mean, firstly, I knocked out a wall. Like, there was a big wall in the back, right it's a 2-story house, right? It's like from the 1800s.
So it's like a brownstone, it's not like a standalone house, right?
But there's some brown, but it ain't stone.
Okay.
It's a standalone house. It's like a 2-story house.
Okay.
It's a 2-story, old, beat up 2-story house that's been run by slumlords for years. So it's totally falling apart. And
so you were renting it, or you owned the building?
You're renting it.
Okay.
We still, yeah. And in the back room, there was like an apartment downstairs with kind of a kitchen and a living room. And I looked at it for a long time, and somehow I decided, through my vast experience in architecture, that it was not a load-bearing wall. So I knocked the wall out. Actually, the Budos helped me knock the wall out. Budos came. They're good at destruction.
Oh, my God.
They helped knock the wall out, and they knew a guy at the dump that we could sneak the stuff in the middle of the night and stuff. So, Staten Island. And so we knocked the wall out, and then the kitchen upstairs started sagging into the downstairs. So we got, Sugarman used to drive this big station wagon, Country Squire. He used to throw the Sugarman 3 in and drive them on tour all over the country in the Country Squire. So we got the jack out of his car, and I got some big beams and used the jack from his car to jack up the ceiling.
Holy shit.
To jack up the roof, and just stuck a beam in there.
Just hope the inspectors don't show up.
But there's no, I mean, it's Brooklyn, man. There's no,
Really?
That's kind of how it is over there. So, we did that, and then I was ripping out the ceiling plaster and stuff, and I got to where the light was in the middle of the room, and all the wiring was this real old cloth wiring that was like crumbling and sparking,
Yeah.
Really, really. And so I was like, let me change this light fixture. So I start unscrewing the light fixture from the ceiling, and as I unscrew the kind of bolt that's holding it to it, I hear psst. What I realize is there's still live gas lines from when there was gas lighting in the house. And the landlords at the time, when they put electricity in, they just kind of
covered it
screwed
up.
They covered it up. They capped them with these with these light sockets. That's how they capped them. And they put their cloth wiring on there. So it's basically like a bomb, just like sparking wires.
Oh, my God.
And pressurized gas going through the whole house. Yeah, so I said, I got to rip all the gas out of the whole house. So I shut all the gas lines out, and I bled them all out, And then Charles tells me that he's going to cook for us all the time. He's like, man, you got to put a gas line in. I was like, we don't need a gas line. We don't need a stove. And he says, no, you got to put it. So we left the oven upstairs, and I ran a whole new gas line up to the oven. And of course, he made us like orange chicken like once in there. I mean, he cooked for us at his house, but he never cooked it. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff. So yeah, everybody was chipping in. He did a lot of the mudding, like the plastering and stuff.
Speaking of Charles Bradley, just as a random aside, I heard a story that he literally just like showed up at your door one day and like knocked on the door and was like, "Hey, I'm Charles Bradley." That's
true. Yeah, and that was before. It was obviously before that because he was already helping me. But it was pretty random. At the time, I lived in a basement apartment in Williamsburg on South 4th Street, and he just came and knocked on my door, and I opened the door and I said, I didn't know who he was, and I said, "How can I help you?" And he said, "I heard you're looking for singers," which I mean, it wasn't like the word was on the street. I wasn't really, it was amazing to meet him, but was not actively looking for singers. And I said, "Where'd you get my number?" And he said, some drummer had given him
Crazy
my number. I think he said, I don't think it was Kenny. I think it was some drummer. But it was somebody I'd never heard of. You know,
Really?
I don't even know that guy. And well, it wasn't my number; it was my address, really. So I was like, I don't even know that guy. And who did you give your address to? You know what I mean? Like, who's got your address?
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't like I had sessions at my house or anything. You know, it was just in my apartment. So I still to this day can't figure out how Charles Bradley found us. And I'd asked him about it many times, and people have asked him about it, but we can't figure it out. But he just showed up at my door and said, "There's a drummer giving him my address." And we were at the time, you know, I went down to the Tar Heel Lounge where he used to sing all the time. He invited us down to see him sing. And there was another singer there we really liked, guy. We called him Silver Fox. I can't think of his real name, but he had this beautiful, high, sweet voice. Mm-hmm. And we wanted him to come sing on this record on Sugarman's album, on the Pure Cane Sugar record, which we were working on the time. And he wouldn't do it because of Sticky Bear or some hustler dude that had him. It was a whole scene there. Okay. But eventually we got Charles to come down and sing "Take It As It Come." And I think that was his first recording, really. I can't think of anything he would have done before that. So that was probably his first recording. And that was again in Amayo's basement. It was probably 2002 or something, 2001.
Okay.
2000 even. But so that's kind of how we hooked up with Charles. And then for a long time, he would just show up and help us with all kinds of construction stuff, you know?
So how long was the process of moving into the place in Brooklyn and getting the construction to the point where it was a functional room?
I mean, it seemed like forever, but I don't know. It might have been 5 or 6 months or something like that.
Okay.
I mean, it was a lot of work. It was a real dark time because I couldn't hire anybody. So we're doing it all ourselves and scrapping it by. Like the way we floated the isolation room in there, the way it's floated is we found tires in the neighborhood and put tires on the ground. And then we went to some kind of clothing factory or something, got all their garbage, all these rags and clippings of cloth. We stuffed all the tires and the whole floor with these cloth.
High tech.
And then we built a room off of that wasn't really touching the house, like a room inside a room, you know?
Wicked.
And that's at Daptone. So that's what's in between the control room and the big live room, is this kind of decent sized isolation room like that. And I got to say, man, I've been in a lot of studios over the years. That's the most isolated room I've ever been in.
That's wicked.
Like more than any of these fancy studios in LA or New York or anything. Like you can't hear nothing comes out of that room. It's just, you know, in there hovering on tires. It's pretty cool.
In Canada, we use hockey pucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Hockey pucks. People use hockey pucks. People use tennis balls. Yeah.
Do you remember what the first thing was that you recorded in there?
The first thing we recorded in there, as soon as we were able to record, there's a dance producer called Kenny Dope Gonzalez. And he was a fan, and he lent me money to buy or maybe bought it for us, really, our first tape machine in there, which is like a big TX 16-track 1-inch. Mm-hmm. And the first thing we recorded in there was a cover of I just came in to see what condition my condition's in.
Oh yeah,
just came in to see, you know, Kenny Rogers one. You know,
yeah.
We recorded it kind of like the Betty LaVette version. My friend Kev Darge, the DJ, who'd always been a big supporter from the Desco days and everything, who's kind of running the deep funk scene in London at the time. He had some connection and told us that they wanted to use it for Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial, and that we were going to get a bunch of money if we could record a version of that. So we recorded a version of that with Sharon. That was the first thing we recorded in that house. You know, obviously the commercial didn't happen. That money didn't come either. But, you know, we didn't put that record out for years because I didn't really like it. And I also felt like, oh, well, we're just copying, you know, Betty LaVette's arrangement. It's not like our own spin on it or something. But people really liked it. So eventually we put it on 45. And a lot of people really liked that record. But that was the first thing we recorded. The first album I think we recorded in there, I believe, was Who Is This America, the Antibalas album.
Okay.
Which was a kind of an epic album that had every possible studio trick you could imagine in it. You know, it was just like, it was a huge band, all recording live, and there was just long songs and these elaborate arrangements, and everybody had concepts about, then this song kind of morphs into space and flies through the universe and turns into the other song. And it's like, So I was trying to do that with splicing tape and stuff, so it was a lot of,
Wow.
It was a very involved album. That was like one of the most technically like involved albums I've ever done, So, I mean, not that it was a masterpiece or anything, but
from a studio point of view, was the room and stuff like, when you turned everything on and started recording, was it a glorious thing, or did you have to like sit there and like work on the room over and over again and perfect it?
Well, I don't think it ever got perfected. I mean, we're still recording there, and it's still kind of a challenge.
Uh-huh.
It's I don't know. It's a weird thing, man. It's such a home, that place, for us. I've been there for so long and invested so much, and it's something you really built with your hands. So you have a certain relationship with it,
Yeah.
and a certain comfort and stuff. So, I mean, obviously we know our way around the studio real well, and I feel like we've made some good, really good sounding records in there.
Yeah, yeah.
There's definitely a lot of people who think I guess that's true in music in general. There's a lot of fetishism. There's people who think there's magic in everything. I remember having a conversation with Mark Ronson once when he was telling me that he thought the linoleum at Daptone was magic. And I was banging my head against the wall. And I was like, man, you got like Homer, you got like one of the greatest drummers around in here, just crushing your songs. And I'm spending like 5 hours moving a mic 1 inch this way or that way to try to get it to sound just right. And then you think the linoleum is magic, and it was kind of frustrating, but there's always been some of that, and we benefit from that too, because we could charge people a bunch of money to go record there.
Right.
But at the end of it, I have a lot of sentiment for that place, but I don't know if I believe in that kind of magic. I think that.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's really more about using your ears, and the biggest thing is if you have good music, you can make a good record.
Yeah.
The technology is very far secondary. People get real into tubes and valves and ribbons and all this stuff, and we use some of that stuff, but I never really felt like that was. I mean, like you said, there's been a consistent sound to the stuff we're doing.
Yes.
And it's been in a lot of different rooms with a lot of different microphones. So it's really not about that, I mean, from the beginning, it's always been about use whatever you have,
know? 5 or 10% of it, but really in the end, it comes down to the people.
Yeah. 2%. Yeah. I mean, if you have, you need a good arrangement. You need great musicians. You need people that have a sound on their instrument and that play the right shit. And more importantly than playing the right shit is not playing the wrong shit,
Totally.
It's really, and it's hard, especially at the time when I started, like in the 90s. It was the idea of, being in New York and having a, funk band or something. It was very different from this thing we were doing. It was very different. The bass players all had 6 or 7 strings and no frets, and they're all playing chords and slapping. And, the drummers had splash cymbals and were playing reverse upside down paradiddles on their drum stools and had 5 bass drums. It wasn't, there was no discipline in it. It was terrible. It was very terrible. In fact, I started playing bass because I couldn't find a bass player at the time. Like, this is even before the Desco days, when I kind of had, college bands and stuff. I had a college band with friends, and I always played drums. I was a drummer in the band.
Oh, okay.
And when that band kind of split up, I wanted to start another band, and I wanted to do this kind of soul band, And I started kind of like, I put an ad in the Village Voice and put up flyers, again, pre-internet.
Yeah.
And, I started trying to find people, and I couldn't find a bass player that sounded good, but I found a drummer. I can't remember the kid's name, but he sounded pretty good. So I was like, oh, well, I could play the bass. That's, especially what I wanted was pretty easy,
Right.
So, so I bought a bass for like $90 at a pawn shop and I started playing bass, and, I wanted somebody to play doom, 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 nobody was doing that,
Right.
So anyway, the point is a big part of it is just kind of like the taste and the discipline of what people are playing. And after that, it's like we've recorded some stuff in some pretty crack ways. Like, yeah, I mean, we used a lot of SM57s, but sure. Even more than that, even worse mics. A lot of Radio Shack mics at the beginning.
You rave about those Radio Shack mics in the early days.
Yeah, and we still use some of that stuff sometimes, man. The thing to me about equipment is you have to shoot it out blind, and if you do that, that's the only way you can be honest with yourself about what something sounds like. Because otherwise, you think you're listening, but you're not. You're thinking about what you read in Mix Magazine or what, Tony Albini used and what Marvin Gaye sang into. You think about all the stuff that has nothing to do with what you're hearing.
Right.
Or how much you paid or how much you didn't pay.
Yeah.
Or, you don't want to feel like a schlub because you spent $500 on a microphone, so you want that to sound better. Or maybe you're being contrary and you want the cheap one to sound better. Whatever it is, you have all these feelings and thoughts that have nothing to do with what you're hearing.
Right.
So like what we've done for years with everything, whether it's a compressor or a microphone or anything, is do it blind. You plug into the board and you cross it up in the patch base. You don't know which one's which, or you have your friends sit at the console and pull up one fader and the other.
Yeah.
And you say, which one do you like? Do you like, Larry, Moe, or Curly?
Right. Yeah.
And you sit there, and when you don't know which they are, and the first tendency of everybody in that situation is they're trying to guess which one's which. Oh, well, the Neumann is Curly, right? I mean, I can tell because of this, and that one's. Just stop thinking. Stop trying to guess anything. Just listen. And it's not a it's not a quiz. It's a question. It's like what actually sounds better. And when you think about it that way, and you just kind of relax your mind, close your eyes, and just listen, you hear very obvious things that you wouldn't normally hear. And sometimes the Radio Shack mic beats the $10,000 Neumann mic, and sometimes the Neumann mic wins, and a lot of times the SM57 wins. And sure, over the years you have mics that just keep winning, and you tend to grab those first.
Right.
But the important thing is that you keep checking. Keep checking and trying things, and so we never really, we never really had that much go-to stuff. There's stuff that there's definitely mics that we used more, and things that get a lot of mileage. And
what are some of the highlights, like some of the real things that you always go for?
I usually plug my bass in direct.
Okay.
That's one of the few things that we always go for. But even then, we try amp sometimes, and sometimes we use amp. Uh-huh. But like the mics on the drums is a good one. Like we usually use one mic when we can. Sometimes we use more. We try them different places, and sometimes they end up overhead. Sometimes they end up on the ground in a sock next to the bass drum. Sometimes they're behind the drummer's head or behind the stool. Do
you still go for dynamic mics for that kind of thing?
No, we use condensers sometimes. I use ribbons a lot.
Yeah,
I use a lot of ribbons. We have this one RCA 77 that I like a lot, that we use on drums a lot. We had that one that somebody'd stolen from somewhere and left at our studio, or I don't know how we got it. We definitely didn't buy that one, but I didn't steal it. Just to be clear for the record, I'm not a stealer. But the at some point somebody was selling one, and we saved up, and I got another one because I thought, oh, this mic's so cool. The other one sounds totally different. And then I go to other studios, like somebody hired me to go do sounds at some studio, and you pull theirs out, and every mic sounds different. I mean, the only thing that's consistent really to me is like a 57, or
totally.
Some kind of, sometimes new mics off the shelf, they can be consistent. But you talk about old mics, people are like, oh, a 77 sounds like this and a 44 sounds like that. It's like, well, which one? That's like saying Mexicans are good singers. It's like, no, some of them might be, but you got to try out each Mexican to see which one can actually sing. I mean, it's you can't really say like one model of microphone has a certain sound.
Yeah.
Especially when you talk about old gear.
Right. Of course. Yeah. What about the console at Daptone? Was that something that changed over the years, or did you have one that you've just stuck with?
Yeah. Well, we've had the one that we've had for a lot of years and that we've stuck with for a long time is it's a Trident 65. Mm-hmm. And I got the same thing out here in California, in the mixing studio here. So it's and it's not that a lot of people think, oh, it's a great board. It's like, it's not really a great board. It's kind of what you can afford. It's a strange price point. You know what I mean? Where you're kind of like, well, we can spend, $1,000. We can spend $1,500, but we can't spend $15,000. There's very little mixing board wise between like $500 and like 20,000.
Totally.
Yeah. It's like, it's basically, you go straight from like Mackeys and Behringers to like, Neves and APIs and stuff that like I'll never afford,
Right.
So there's not that much in the middle. And I found the Trident 65 is kind of that just barely professional board that I could afford. Like the one I wanted was like a Trident 70. The 80B is a good one. Obviously there's the A range and these really fancy ones, but the 80B was kind of a real standard one, and they got great EQs and stuff. So that's kind of what I wanted, and I couldn't really afford it. So the 65 was kind of the one that I could afford,
Yeah.
And, there's lots of transistors and shit in there. And the preamps are terrible. The preamps are, just noisy. And you can record a guitar through them, but very little else,
Okay.
Like you turn them and they're, it's all crackly and stuff. But the EQs are real cool. I really like the EQs in those boards. Uh-huh. And they're real functional the way that they have, they're split consoles. I almost always I like split consoles. Can wrap my head around it more. And even when I don't have a split console, I usually use a console like a split console. I'll use, board in New York is big. It's relatively big. It's 24 channels, 24 by 8 by 16. The one I have out here is 16 by 4 by 8 or something. Mm-hmm. But what we'll do in New York is like the top 8 channels on the right, we just use those for tape returns because we're doing 8-track recording anyway. So we just use those for tape returns,
Yeah, yeah.
And if we need to send stuff to tape or headphones or something, we use the left side of the board. We put the broken channels all the way on the left, and then somewhere in the middle you have we're trying to use the rest, But
do you find with some of that stuff you get hung up with like maintenance and all that bullshit, or do you have somebody that can take care of that stuff for you? Or
well, we've been for years. I went to school with a couple guys that ended up very techy and stuff. Like I went to school with a guy named Andrew Roberts that runs Purple Audio, and that's
a great company.
Yeah, and also Matt Marinelli, who's an unbelievable tech and engineer. And has Choral Audio and a bunch of other stuff. So Matt usually fixes the stuff for us. But I bought another. I mean, the one I have at Daptone, the console, I think we paid, was it $1,300? I think it must maybe been $1,300 for that and a tape machine or something, something like that. And then the one out here I got for about, I can't remember what I paid, $500 or something. But then a couple years later, I found another one for sale on Craigslist, kind of busted up for a few $100. Another small one. So what I did was I got that one. I just used it as spare channels. Yeah, because you can just pull the channels out, and the ones here and the ones in New York are all interchangeable. Other than this being 4 bus and that being 8 bus. Yeah, it's less bus buttons. But so we just always have spares in the shop and just kind of switch them out constantly. So we don't have to fix them. I mean, we fix them a little bit, but I'm not great with that stuff. I can. There's a lot of like I said, it's not super high quality boards. There's a lot of chips in it that you can just pull out and swap back in without even having to figure out if they're broken. It's cheap. Right. So we do that. But I've had some different boards over the years. Out here for a minute, I had a Toft console.
Yeah. How did that work for you?
It was kind of half amazing. Like the preamps were so much better than my Trident 65. The preamps were great, very beautiful and usable. And obviously it was new. So it, in some level it worked. The EQs were great, but the right half of the board was real cheap. Oh. And I think I kind of get it because it's the same thing. They're trying to hit this kind of odd price point, Right. It's like you can only, if you're not going to spend thousands of dollars, you can only have so much quality. And I think they kind of focused on what they felt most people really want, which is true, which is like the preamps, the left side of the board, like the input channels. Yeah. I do a lot of like grouping stuff together. I do a lot of that where it's like maybe I'll get the drums and the horns and the background vocals and pan them all hard left, but I'll put them in one group and then compress them and EQ them as one sound just in the left speaker. I'll do weird stuff like that. And you need your groups and auxes. You need all that stuff working. Right. That stuff I couldn't hang with it on that board. At one point, smoke came out of the right side of that board. And they were very good about fixing stuff. So I actually ended up giving it to Joey, who's using it now from the Dap-Kings, who's using it now to make great sounding recordings. Oh, cool. He's got that in New York now. He had it in Staten Island. Now it's in Brooklyn. Yeah. So it's a great board, but I would definitely endorse that board for somebody that's looking for, a really, really reasonably priced board with great EQs and preamps. It's just for what I needed more functionality out of the kind of master section and the group section and all that,
Can you tell me a bit about, like, I find that really interesting, the whole idea of like, just like grouping huge amounts of stuff together. I always find like one track of a console could respond really well to like a full drum kit and a bass and stuff like that. Is that like, do you find that, is that an aesthetic choice or is it just purely functionality? Like you're just dealing with a minimal amount of tracks and you have to shove stuff onto one track?
I do it more in mixing than tracking. We do it in tracking sometimes, but really for the most part when we're tracking, like for example, drums, like a lot of people are like, oh, you got to bust all the drums together, but we're mostly using one mic. Like sometimes we use two mics. In that case, we do use a bus to bus them both together. And like if we have two mics on the drums, it's good to bus them together and then kind of insert an EQ if you're going to try and EQ them or a compressor or whatever you're trying to do to them. I like the tape to sound as good as possible. So if somebody just pulls up the fader, it sounds like a record, Yeah. But a lot of that buzzing stuff is unnecessary because, like horns, for example, same thing. Like you just put up one mic and you're blending the horns. The guys in the room are, again, it comes down to the musicians. Like, well, you got to get a great horn section. That's not even like guys that are virtuosos or, it's not about individuals. It's about guys that have played together and have a sound together and have a way of breathing together and phrasing and vibrating together,
Yeah.
Guys that have been on the road for years, smelling each other.
Totally.
There's a sound to that, and you can't replace that. Like, there's not like you can pop one Brecker brother in there and all of a sudden it's going to be better. It's going to be weirder, Like there's, they all have to, vibe together. And that's
yeah, they have to be one instrument instead of.
It really is related because it's, that's why you can record a horn section with one microphone, is because they have a sound as a horn section, And a lot of those things, I think it's weird because when you're in the studio and people aren't used to working that way, they look at it as this real, almost like this kind of brave, bold commitment, to put three horns on one microphone. But it's a much simpler way to do it. I mean, eventually you have to mix the horns at some point, right? Like, yeah. It seems like if you're sitting in the room and they're playing the bridge and the third, the third on the saxophone is too loud, or the trumpet is a little flat, or, something's weird in the tone. Like, if you don't hear it then, like, you're not going to hear it when you're mixing. It's not like I'm going to go hire some smarter people to come check it out later on, so you still have to make those decisions, but you make it while you're tracking. And right. I think right now people tend to really rush tracking. They rush sounds and performances.
Because there's so many options after the fact.
They just figure it's all about we got what we need. It's just kind of like, well, you do 10 takes and later on we'll figure out what was good and what wasn't, And so, I mean, to me, that's the whole thing about the tape and the 8-track. And I'm sorry, I'm all over the place here.
No, it's good. It's great.
I'm sure you'll stop me if you need to. But, the thing about tape and 8-track is, people get very obsessed with analog technology, and digital's wrong because the way it tracks transients, and it does, analog has these compressions, and everybody gets really deep into the technical part of it. But to me, I think that there's truth to those things, but those are very small details. The huge difference to me is the process.
Yes.
Which is that, like, you have one track,
right?
To record your horn section. And that forces you to sit there and figure out how the song's supposed to go with the musicians in the studio while you're doing the recording, as opposed to later on. Yeah. You have to figure out the blend. You have to figure out what they're going to play on the bridge. When you're cutting something with a singer, if the first chorus is better than the second chorus, you record the second chorus again.
Yeah.
I often bring it up as the example of like a saxophone player going in. You have enough isolation so you can overdub stuff, and you could say, oh, let's go to record the saxophone solo again. But they know they're recording over the old one, so it's not the same thing as being in a digital studio where it's not just that there's undo, it's just everybody assumes you're keeping all these tracks. Nobody likes to throw anything out, and they figure, oh, you'll take the best note for this and that, and if I don't play something better, I know I have the other one. But when you go into the studio and you're thinking, I'm recording over everything I played before, the only thing left on this record is what happens right now. There's a different feeling in the player plays with different feeling, their balls and their guts and their hairs in their neck. It's like, it's a performance, and they put something into it. It's a different mindset, and some musicians can do that all the time. It's no big difference. But I just feel like, as far as the musicians and the engineers and whoever's working in charge of arranging it and the songwriting, everything has to be at a higher level. Mostly the musicianship, but everything has to be at a higher level. The way that you're blending stuff and the way you're putting stuff together, because we do splices, we splice takes together, and we do overdubs, and we fix things. It's not like recording live to a wax cylinder or something, but there's a sense of commitment that requires permanence, that requires, there's a sense of recording a performance, and there's a sense of knowing what you're doing, because that's what you're doing is what's on the record.
Right.
And
I love that.
I've been in sessions where I've been hired as a bass player, guitar player, or something. You come in, the producer's like, oh, we're going to play this, play that. And you're just kind of barely getting their head around how the song goes, and trying out different things and trying to hear what the producer's hear, and you do a few takes. And then they say, okay, cool, I think we got it. And I'm just like, what? Like, we never, and it's just constantly a sense, oh, we got what we need. We're going to, we can fix that up later,
Ew.
Like, and it is a little bit ew, so, yeah. But to me, that's, for some reason, that's not really in the front of people's minds. Partly, I think, because I think people associate, when they say analog recording, most people are thinking about 24-track tape. And even now, like the way that people are using tape is they use it as a sound effect. They record to it, and then they dump it into the computer and finish the record. Or they record the computer and they just dump it to tape for a second and dump it back. Like they use it as a sound.
Yeah.
They aren't using it as a process,
Yeah.
And it's real different 24-track tape and 16-track or 8-track,
Huge difference.
And that's why we moved, because when I started recording, I was doing 4-track, and then we got an 8-track. I was pretty excited. And then we moved up to 16-track for a couple of years, and then I moved back to 8-track, because I just felt like 16-track was too much,
Much? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, because somebody'd say, "Hey, you got a free track? Let me do another one."
Right.
With 8-track, you rarely can say yes to that. Sometimes you can, but you can pretty much honestly say most of the time, "Sorry, I don't have another track."
Yeah.
It's on you to sing this shit right now.
Totally.
This is it. This is what's on the record, and that's a different thing. And you can't do that with anybody. You got to have the right, musicians and singers and stuff to do that.
Could you just kind of take me through your process then with, say, something kind of like mid era of like Sharon's career, like I Learned the Hard Way or something, which is it's a great sounding record. And how much of that would have been done all live, everyone performing together? Would Sharon have recorded her vocals live with the band, or do you sit down with Sharon and like work through the song? Like, what was your process like at that point?
Well, I think a big part of it has to do with Sharon and her way of her process for learning songs, which was, admittedly, especially around that time, pretty difficult. She got to a point where she didn't want to hear, she didn't want people telling her how to sing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's like, I'm a soul singer. You're not a soul singer, And it was like, well, yeah, Sharon, but you're not a songwriter. You want us to write songs for you. We have to tell you how they go. And some guys, Binky and some of the other guys that were better singers and stuff were able to, she kind of was able to pick up on their songs and stuff better. I think Tommy and stuff. But me, I've always been a terrible, terrible singer. And everything comes out of my mouth sounds bad, which I always told Sharon. I was like, man, that's what you should be happy about that. That's why you got a job, But, we always had this very, it just drove me nuts for years that we'd have this divide where I'd write a song for her. And I knew what it was supposed to sound like, but I couldn't get her to, it was very hard to get her to like sing it, So she would always be kind of like poo-pooing it and winching up her face, and she didn't like it and stuff. And then eventually I'd drag it out of her, and she'd have it on tape, and then we'd go do it live, and she'd get real into it. And, not all of them, but most of the time she'd end up really owning those songs. And
you were writing the bulk of her material, right?
Well, the first record, I pretty much wrote the first record.
Yeah.
The second record had, it was basically as the band went on, it became, the first record was, even though it was all friends and family and people worked together, I had a budget and I kind of hired everybody as side musicians. So I kind of wrote a record and then hired these guys to come in and play it. Uh-huh. That's kind of how the first record was. But then we started touring. We became a band, and everybody's listening to the same Isley Brothers tapes in the van and stuff. So everybody kind of got into it, and so everybody started writing more and more. And I think, the second record had a little bit more contributions from, Homer and Tommy wrote a song or two, and then, in the third record, and as the records went on, more and more people write them. But by the time we got to like this last Soul of a Woman record, I don't know what I wrote on that record. 10%, 20%. I mean, it was really the band. Everybody was writing. It was really, a lot of times I get credit for being like the songwriter in that band, which is not true. I mean, at the beginning it was.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely. I think I'm definitely the band leader of that band, and which is not as much about telling people what to do as just kind of more about listening to everybody and kind of trying to keep things moving the same direction. It's not. I think that's a separate conversation.
Yeah.
But the point is, because of that process with the song, a lot of times her vocals wouldn't be live. There was some of her recordings that her vocals were live with us, but a lot of it, they weren't live. I mean, a lot of times she'd be singing with us, but it would end up being a scratch. So a lot of times we would put her in the isolation room.
Okay.
And then there'd be usually drums, bass, 2 guitars, and percussion live. A lot of times percussion wasn't live just because Fernando had to work or take care of a kid or something, so he'd come later. But when possible, we would do it all live. Yeah. Sometimes the piano would be live. Horns would be live once in a while, but usually overdubbed.
Okay.
And so we'd usually, do that, and then Victor sometimes do keyboards, sometimes it'd be live. A lot of times in the studio too, we're switching places. Like Binky played great bass on a lot of records, and I play guitar on some stuff.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, sometimes it's one of those things. It's like, because of the way that we approach music, you don't necessarily need to be a virtuoso. You need to have your rhythm right, and you need to be playing the right shit. But like I played piano on a bunch of those records, and it's not. I mean, I guess it's kind of braggadocious, but it's like not really that I was killing it. It's more really that what needed to be played was what I could play.
Right. Yeah.
So same thing with guitar. Like I can play a chank on a record.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely some switching around on records, times when different people are sitting at the drums and everything,
And how involved are you in like working out people's parts and stuff? Like, are you getting right in there and being like, no, you got to simplify that, or do you find just everyone's so dialed into the sound of what you were going for that you were just able to? Yeah,
well, initially, I think it's the same. It's a similar answer. Initially, like the first record, I think I was telling everybody what to play. Not that they didn't come up with some stuff, but it was like I had the horn lines, I had the guitar parts and stuff, and people came up with a couple little things. But then, like by the second record, everybody's contributing. For me in particular, a lot of times, like I'll write something really soup to nuts, like really have it arranged. Like before the band ever hears it, I have like string parts and
everything,
trumpet, horn parts and stuff. And I don't think that's necessarily our best stuff, but there's definitely songs and stuff. There's songs like the song I Learned the Hard Way is like that. Like I kind of had a demo that had almost everything in it. A lot of stuff to me where the Dap-Kings sound the best is the stuff that's a lot more collaborative, where it's like a lot of guys in the band, maybe they write a song, but they don't necessarily have all the parts, and they come in and then we come up with the other parts. But I think that part of the process is kind of interesting, because that's another thing that I feel is kind of unique within our family is just that vibe of being in the room with the Dap-Kings working on a song. It's collaborative, but there's something very different. There's really no bullshitting. Right. If somebody plays something and somebody says, "Man, that chord sounds cheesy to me," everybody just tears into each other. It's like everybody's busting balls all the time. So it's like if somebody plays something that's even at all questionable or whack, or like why did you hit the cymbal in the middle of the verse, dude?
Yeah.
Like how drummers will do that shit where every 4 bars they play a fill.
Yeah,
like,
I do know that.
If somebody did that in our studio, everybody would just stop and look at him like, "What are you doing, you asshole? Why are you doing that? Like, why would you do that?" Like there's a lot of that. And when you go back and listen to a take, there's really none of this kiss-ass bullshit that you see in most studios where everybody's just kind of like, "Yeah, man, that was magic, man, you sound great." It's just none of that. It's just kind of like if something sounds good, somebody will be like, "Yeah, man, that was dope." But for the most part, it's like everybody tearing everybody apart the whole time, Right. And that's how those arrangements come together.
It's like a family.
Yeah, and sometimes people have ideas, and what if you do it this way? No, I want to do it that way. Well, what if he does it this way? Well, what if he does it every other time? No, don't do it every other time. That's that's bullshit compromise. You could do this, and you have these, and you fight it out about whether, and it could be minute things. It's like, for example, a chank, doom, chank, doom, doom, chank, like just a chank on a guitar, like. You could play it up or you could play it down. You could play on this pickup or that pickup. You could play this inversion, you could play that inversion. And those tiny details, sometimes we get pulled into them, and there's 7 guys arguing on whether the guitar player's pick should go one direction or the other direction.
I can totally imagine that.
Nothing's off the table, and the important thing is that it's all driven by the idea of everybody just wanting to make a record that feels cool.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with anybody's ego or what anybody's capable of, or what somebody else did, or what you think people want to hear, or what's going to sell.
So a lot of the time you'd be doing this, Sharon would lay down a scratch vocal, and then as you mentioned, like she was it was a bit of push and pull with her, like working on new material. Was that a hard process, getting her to be comfortable with the song enough to sing it? And like,
at the beginning it was easy. At the beginning she would just I would just tell her, I'd sing, she would just sing whatever I told her to sing, and you hear she's a different kind of singer when you listen to like Dap Dip, and it's beautiful, but it's same as a lot of singers where their early stuff has a certain effortless kind of naivete to it, where there's really they're just not self-possessed at all. It's just kind of like, well, you want me to sing, I'm going to sing. And there's no sense of like, I'm a singer and this is who I am, and then as that evolved, she got to be, to me, a greater and greater singer over the years, especially live, man. Like by the end, even right before she died, the way she was singing, man, when we did those last few shows was unbelievable, man. She was just singing her ass off. Just sounded so good.
I just rewatched the movie, and it's true, man. She was on
She
another
was
level.
she was on fire. She was on fire. But again, also she was more invested in herself as as a person, as a singer, as a celebrity, as all these things. So it was she had to find her way through, defining herself and kind of having pride and kind of make like the journey to making it her song.
Right. Yeah.
Was sometimes I think we'd struggle with that together, Yeah. But towards the end, like the last couple records, it kind of got easier again. She kind of got, I think partly was getting sick, but she to me got she was crazy. Sharon was fucking out of her mind, man. She was crazy. She was built from, I don't know what she was made out of, something that nobody else was made out of, I mean, you talk about that forever. It never really, words don't really describe what, where she was coming from. She was made out of some kind of cosmic dust or something. But after she got sick, I think, after that first leave of absence, she came back with a different kind of maturity, not like an old lady kind of maturity, but just kind of like a certain humility and a certain perspective that I don't think she had up to that point. Mm-hmm. And she came to the stage and the studio after that with such a sense of purpose, and I mean, she never had a problem being in the present, Sharon. I mean, she was always in the moment, mm-hmm. I mean, she was, totally engaged in life in the deepest way in every moment. But at that point, somehow she was able to, I don't know, man, there's certain humility or something about it. She just sang every night like it was the last night she was ever going to sing. I mean, she sang like that before she got sick, mm-hmm. But after she got sick, there was just, it just kind of cut a lot of the noise down, a lot of the bullshit that hung her up, just backstage and travel, just details, just little things that would get on her nerves.
She let that kind of stuff go a little bit.
She stopped complaining about petty stuff. I mean, mm-hmm. She just kind of let a lot of the petty stuff go and just focused on just being happy to be with. She just loved being with us, man. In the studio, she loved it, and we all did, man. Just being in that house together and eating takeout and smoking weed and talking shit on each other, just like hanging out, just like being family. And she loved the band. She loved everybody, man. Oh, man. She just wanted to be with us in the van or whatever. Yeah. And she'd get upset when there was any kind of fracture in that, when somebody was mad or somebody didn't want to go somewhere with us or something. She, it would upset her, Yeah. So she just got into just loving being together with us and loving connecting with the fans and loving singing. She just really focused on what was important.
You guys as a unit and as a band and like that whole concept was so strong. Was it an easy thing for you to flip around and back other people up, like your work with Charles Bradley or Lee Fields or Amy Winehouse? Like, was that a leap at all, like bringing other people into that fold, or was it easy?
Well, it's I mean, those are all different people, and they're totally different. Like Lee Fields I worked with before Sharon. So yeah, Lee Fields is totally different to work with than Sharon. Just the way that he approaches music and how he sings, they have totally different strengths and styles in the studio. Mm-hmm. I mean, Winehouse is a different thing because it wasn't really our record. Like Mark Ronson came in and he wanted us to hook him up, so we kind of recorded the music for him and hooked up the arrangements and But I worked on Amy Winehouse for a handful of days.
Just as a player, basically, or?
Well, I didn't really. I don't think I played on any of her records. I didn't want to play bass and engineer at the same time for those sessions, so I hired Nick.
Oh, okay.
He's a great bass player and who always played with, Homer since I started recording them as the Mighty Imperials when they were 15. But he plays with Leon and he played with Andy Baz for a while. He's an unbelievable bass player. So I hired Nick Movshan to come in on that session for the Amy Winehouse one, just so I could just concentrate on kind of engineering and making sure shit was going right. And I didn't have to be on both sides of the glass at the same time, because I didn't have any assistant or anything at that time.
On a record like that, like it comes across sounding kind of ultra modern in a way. Like it's got your stamp all over it, but like the kick drum all of a sudden doesn't sound like a Dap-Kings kick drum. Were things being augmented like after the fact, or did you just shift what you did?
Well, I mean, the way it worked was Mark came to us with Amy's demos and stuff, and we recorded. I think we did like 6 tracks or something on that Back to Black record.
Yeah,
and we'd put the music down, And she came and sang on some stuff. I don't think she sang on those tracks. She sang on like Valerie and some other stuff that we did with her. She came in and sang maybe live, but most of the stuff, then he would take the tracks, and I don't know what the hell he did with them. I mean, I don't know if he was adding, because that's once you hit the pop world, who knows what the hell they're doing. They get some mixers using beat replacer to,
It kind of sounds like that. I mean, it's the feels there, but
subsonic thing under the kick drum or something,
Yeah.
And, they did like orchestral overdubs other places. And,
Okay.
I think all her vocals at least on that record were done other places, so they kind of took what we had as kind of the raw materials like that. We kind of laid down the foundation.
Yeah.
And, a lot of the arrangements, there's a lot of stuff on that record, guys are still bitter over, I wrote that horn line, that's Dave Guy, the trumpet player, said I came up with that, which is true, or, Victor, but it's, you're hired to do a session, you do the session, you can't get so hung up on that stuff, but whatever. I mean, the idea is that we basically hooked up the music for him, and we were kind of an element in what he was able to do. And, maybe the reason why he was so successful is that the way that he was able to kind of marry the rawness and the realness of what we were doing with these pop elements, and that record was able to cross over in this big way or something. I don't know. I mean, I usually feel like whenever I try to answer anything about that kind of thing, I'm just not qualified. I'm not the guy to ask. I mean, I didn't listen to the radio, man. This shit doesn't make sense to me, so I don't know.
I love it.
I don't know how, I don't know what's on that record or how they did it really. I know what we do. Yeah. And I know that he's a great producer to work with. After that, he used those guys. I mean, Nick was just recording with him. Even last week, they were out here in Malibu working on some RONs and stuff. But he used those guys all the time for everybody's records, Yeah. Lady Gaga and whoever else. They hired him to produce, and he brings those guys in, man. That's his crew.
So you're out in California now full time, and there's 2 studios going now. Is that what's happening?
Yeah. Well, I'm out here in Riverside, where I grew up. I was in New York for a long time and started having kids and moved back out here. So I have like a mixing studio out here. Okay. And then I have my mixing studio is in this big old brick building. It used to be a YMCA. Cool. And it's like this art center now. And 4 times, basically once a year for the last 4 or 5 years, we've kind of took over this big room in the place and run a snake down and done recordings out here. So for the most part, we record in New York and mix out here, The Daptone records we've done out here is mostly just the James Hunters, the last 3 James Hunter records.
Oh, you did those there?
We did those here, yeah. And to me, the room out here is amazing. Like, those are my favorite recordings as far as stuff that I've done.
Those sound amazing, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's this huge room. It's like my landlord, guy who owns the building, has this room that I think originally was a racquetball court on the roof. It's got these huge ceilings. It's really high. And it's his apartment. So in order to record there, I basically give him money to go on vacation, right? And then we move all his furniture out of his apartment. We take a picture so we know where it's at. Move all his furniture out of his apartment, and we bring in carpets and put moving blankets on the walls and office dividers and
recall.
Move a piano in there, and we move in an organ, and and then we run wires down the hall, like 2 hallways. It's about 200 feet away from my mixing room. Wow. So we use the mixing room as a control room, and we record in there, and it's just a beautiful sounding room. But, again, like those Hunter records, those are really live. I mean, he's saying, like that last Hunter record, he didn't overdub a single. I mean, he overdubbed harmonies, but he didn't, the lead vocals are all live.
It's all right off the floor, yeah.
And again, it goes back to him writing great songs and being able to sing them. Yeah. I mean, if you have a band that can play like that, you sit there and you work on the arrangements and you try to get the right take. And at the end of it, you end up doing a lot of splices to get get everything just how you want it. You're recording something that actually happened. So it's not really a production miracle. You know what I mean? It's more of hard work with people that know what they're doing, man. People that sound good.
Your essay or whatever it's called, Shitty is Pretty, that was a huge thing for me. I loved that, reading that piece. I don't even know what you wrote it for. I just found it on the internet like quite a while, like when I was kind of starting out.
Yeah, that was for Big Daddy magazine. Okay. It was this kind of like soul and funk magazine.
Like, I mean, I wasn't even making funk records, but I was starting to make records. But so much of that resonated with me, just like, I don't know, like sense of humor and like just what not to play, tone
Yeah.
and taste and all that stuff. I was so fascinated by that, and I think everybody should read it.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you, the thing to me about that article is I can't believe that people bring it up all the time, and I feel like it was, again, like I didn't really know what the hell I was talking about. I mean, like I still probably have the same kind of attitude and a lot of the same philosophy towards recording, but I didn't know what I was doing then. Not that I know what I'm doing now either, but yeah, it definitely resonated with a lot of people, and I think it's, again, I think it's just kind of the idea that you don't have to do stuff the way that people want you to, It's just this kind of a sense of freedom and quality, freedom from a lot of the judgments and pressures that people put on themselves in making music and making other things too,
Yeah.
The idea that things have to be a certain way, So I think that it's still pretty much a big part of what helps us do stuff is just kind of trying crazy shit,
Yeah. Well, I just found like reading it, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, I read it and I reread it, last week when I knew I was going to talk to you. And I found like so many of the things that you said actually stuck with me. Whereas like, I've read countless other articles and shit that have totally vanished out of my brain, but so much of that stuck with me that I still kind of like, I bring up to myself all the time. I'm just like go back and read that Shitty is Pretty article and see what he said about that. But anyway, I just found that fascinating, and I don't know if you'll ever do something like that again. But
well, thank you, man. It's flattering that anybody I can't believe that article doesn't go away. So that's cool. But well, I mean, there's a lot of things like now. Like I was doing our interview for like some. I'm not gonna say which one, but some trade magazine, recording type magazine thing, and they said kept asking me these questions about gear, and I was like, man, like if I kept telling them like, man, I don't really want to support that kind of thing, that kind of thinking with these kids out here reading some magazine, think, oh, I like this record, I got to go buy this thing, and it's like, it's just not a good way to approach stuff. Like,
totally, you
got to use whatever you got,
That's what I love.
And I said, if you really want a tip about gear, the best tip I can give you is the Guitar Center has like this return policy. It's unbelievable. It's true, and it's what I use it like crazy, man.
Yeah,
that's how we did the Hunter record.
Just
it's
try
like
shit out.
A lot. You just go out there. Oh, you say, oh, I need an acoustic guitar. I need an amp. We knew we needed a talkback speaker for the other. Whatever we did, we make a list of stuff. We go over there, spend like $3,000. I tell them what I'm using it for. I say, I'm using it for a session. I'll be back in a week, and you use it, all of it, and then you go bring it back. And that to me is like, that piece of information is so much more valuable than like, oh, the RE73 is, has a better frequency response than the RE74. It's like, for some kid out there trying to make a record, like, use what you want, use what you can. Here's a tip. You can go over here, spend zero money, and use whatever gear they got in there, Yeah. I mean, like I was talking about Dare, the studio in Long Island, where we recorded like the Doctares and all the stuff that was like, people thought was from Nigeria, and I was, man, we're using heavy metal, we're using like Kramer guitars, using whatever they had in that studio. We didn't even bring our own guitars to the studio, you know what I mean? The drums it was all heavy, it was a heavy metal rehearsal studio.
Holy shit, that's hilarious.
Yeah, like, I mean, if it's like, oh, somebody says, oh, I got a limited budget, I need a good board, it's like, go on Craigslist, get yourself a Mackie. They're great.
Yeah.
For that price, you have that many channels and EQs and everything, man. I've done records on those,
Yeah.
I mean, Desert Island, don't give me a Neumann, give me a 57.
Yeah.
You can record anything
Absolutely.
with a 57, really.
Yeah.
And I think those to me are the really important messages for people that are, trying to make cool records, getting into it. I mean, yeah, and sure, if you have a budget and after years, you can try, you can get, a Pool Tech EQ or whatever. I mean, I use all kinds of cool stuff that I have cool gear out here, man. I use some cool stuff, but those are the leather seats. Those are not that's not the engine. Those are luxuries, and if, it's great if you have them, but people feel so much pressure that they need to buy or own or have these certain things in order to make cool sounding records. And it's just not true. I mean,
it's bullshit.
Tommy made that first Charles Bradley record mostly with like a 57 in his bedroom, like a 388. And it's a great, great, great sounding record, Yeah. And it's like you put that up against, maybe, Charles' last record where Tommy had all kinds of great gear. And if you listen to it as an engineer, there's some beautiful sounds and some pretty amazing things happening sonically. But if you listen to it, it's just somebody listening to a record. It's like, it doesn't matter that much. It matters a little bit.
Yeah.
Like what really matters is, the songs, Charles singing, the cool bass line, whatever, like what the musicians are doing. That's the meat of it.
Totally. Well, thanks, man. I mean, I could talk to you all day, but this is, it's amazing to talk to you about all this history and your ideas and stuff. And I really thank you for spending the time with me.
Yeah, Steve, man. If anything else comes up, man, give me a call. Okay. Sorry, I know it's a bit rambly.
No, it's great. That's what this is all about. That's how I roll. Yeah.
All right. Be well, man.
All right. You too.
Talk to you.
Bye. Folks, that was my conversation with Gabriel Roth. So great to speak with that guy. Make sure you go and download Shitty is Pretty, Volume 1 and 2. It's a great essay that you should read. If you're into music, you need to check it out. And also check out all the great Daptone's records that continue to come out to this day. There's so much great music to check out and enjoy. Do that. I will see you next month for another episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers. Oh, yeah. Thank you for listening, everybody. The Music Makers and Soul Shakers podcast was recorded in Nashville, Tennessee at the Hen House Studio. You can visit us online at www.stevedawson.ca. As always, I would like to thank Jeremy Holmes in Vancouver, BC for his help with research, and we'll see you next month for another gripping episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers.